So what kind of book is Genocide Bad? And we just heard a chapter of it, but who is your intended audience here, and what do you hope readers take away from the book?
So I think there's two intended audiences. My hope is that the book will reach some people who are apathetic about Palestine, they just don't know much, or even like I would really love it to reach some Jewish people who are like starting to question and deconstruct Zionism, and maybe they see it in a bookstore and they pick it up, or they get it recommended to them by a friend, and someone who's not already engaged in this movement and this kind of activism, and it helps them to deconstruct the lies they've grown up believing. But I also know that I think the vast majority of people who've like pre-ordered the book are like, they already know my content, they already follow me. So for them, like this chapter kind of shows, it's like trying to show you how because I've spent all year just being online, getting so much Israeli talking points thrown at me. And so like, these are sort of the thing, I'm giving you the rhetorical skills and the research that I've done to fight all these individual trolls in the comments. Like, let's put this all in one place, and hopefully it'll help other people like speak out or have those conversations with the people in their lives who are still believing in Zionist things. Yeah.
I saw parts of your book and saw it's very research heavy, and I'm wondering, what was the process of putting this book putting this book together? Like, how long did it take to kind of take all your ideas, all these talking points, and really translate it into the book that we have today?
So I had been preparing for a while, like unknowingly, because for the year before October 7th, I was working on a historical fiction novel. It's set in the 17th century, and so it's reflecting a lot of like Jewish history, in the 1600s. Which not a lot of people know about. A lot of even Jews, all we know about our history is the Holocaust, and then it just stops. And also I wanted to write a book, because I was an anti-Zionist for a few years now, So it was designed to be sort of anti-Zionist Jewish fiction, to help Jews see that we weren't always victimized everywhere equally. Things were different depending on, so the book takes place a part within the Ottoman Empire and a part within Christian Europe, and just kind of showing how, like, depending on how Jews related to power in a certain area would determine whether they were being oppressed or being oppressors. Because that's just kind of what human beings do. If you're in a place where you have the opportunity to oppress someone else, some people are going to take that up. So I had done all this research, this historical research for that book, that was really relevant then when, October 7th happened. And I think, I started being one of the Jewish people online saying like, okay, all us Jews are so hysterical about anti-Semitism, and like, we've been grown up all our lives hearing never again, you must never allow this kind of hate that we experienced in Europe to happen again. And of course, for me, it's very obvious to see those parallels of what's happening in Palestine. So bringing that history in, and trying to talk to my community and help them, first of all, learn their own history, which Zionists silence all the aspects of our history that are not useful to their narratives. And then, spreading that education and making those explicit connections to what's happening in Palestine. So some of the research I've been doing like the year before, and then like I said, just a lot of it. And then I also had been just reading a lot about Palestine for a few years, just like being involved with Jewish Voice for Peace. I had gotten more and more involved in Zionism over the years, and or in anti-Zionist activism over the years. And so I had been reading Palestinian books, and I've had a YouTube book channel since I think like 2020, and I would push Palestinian books. I try to get people to read Palestinian books, so I had that knowledge as well. So I think that's why my content was able to sort of strike a nerve after October 7th, and because I was just like ready to talk about these things. And then over the past year, I've just a lot of the book is also journalism. This chapter didn't talk as much about what's happening in Gaza today and over the past year, but some of the chapters are more like talking about the situation and different news stories that's happened. And I think just because I'm like this chronically online person now, and I'm sure some of you have been consuming all of the, Instagram content and processing that. And so, part of what, this isn't the book to like capture, here's a history of the war on Gaza. Other people are writing and publishing that book this year, but there's like elements of that in this as well. Yeah.
So as a writer, how do you see the role of writers within the Palestinian liberation movement? And how can writers fight back in an industry and political climate that's so hostile to those who write about anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism?
It's just so important. Rhetoric is, the way we use words, propaganda is the most powerful front in any war is propaganda. I really liked Rashid Khalidi in an interview recently. He was saying, talking about, a lot of people, we're talking about the Palestinian resistance and they want to bring up Vietnam and they want to bring up Algeria, but they do so in a way where they're discounting the impact of propaganda and of like counter propaganda, of liberatory education, of the nonviolent and the culture work. The culture work is everything. And he just said if they could have gone on fighting indefinitely in Vietnam, they could have gone on fighting indefinitely in Algeria if the people of France and if the people of the US hadn't turned so hostile towards those war and just lost, all will to keep fighting. So the culture war is really important. The US, Israel is our proxy. This is our war here. And so the culture work of turning more of the populace against this war, and I think we've done incredible work this year. The whole movement, there's never been so much Palestinian solidarity in the entire 76-year run of Israeli history. So I think some people get frustrated because change is slow and people are dying, but I do think incredible momentum has been gathering, and the narrative is really changing. There's bipartisan disgust for this genocide, and hopefully that continues to grow. Yeah.
And a lot of that traction has been happening on social media. And as someone who is very active on social media, I know you mentioned that you've helped raise $500,000 for families in Gaza through your work on social media. And so I'm wondering, how can social media be used as a tool to help the movement for Palestinian liberation, and how can social media be used against us as well?
I think on the whole, it's been a net good because it escapes elite capture. So in previous, decades, it was just the Zionist media. It was the only thing that people were exposed to in the U.S. My dad said that my grandfather was like a communist, but he loved Israel because he never even heard the Palestinian story, and he thought of Israel as the socialist utopia, and he just totally bought the lie. My dad's if he was alive today, he would be sickened. He'd be disgusted. He'd be totally for Palestine, but just in before the 2000s, before really like Twitter and stuff, especially like a lot of Jewish people in the U.S., just a lot of people in the U.S., if you didn't have connections to people in Palestine, if you didn't have a personal relationship, they just never heard another story. So I think that social media, social media exists to manufacture consumerism and get people to buy stuff on TikTok Shop. It was not designed to spread liberatory education. TikTok is not for spreading class consciousness, but it can be hijacked, It can be hijacked in a way the New York Times cannot be hijacked by the people. So I think that that's valuable, and it's difficult because every time we seem to be making traction, there's a new way they're shadow banning us or censoring us, or they're trying to maintain control of these systems, but people are really creative, and I just have faith. I have to have faith that we'll keep finding ways to hijack those information sharing systems.
in the book Genocide Bad, you talk a lot about, and you mentioned this just right now, about like the research you've done on Jewish history, and in the media it's really frowned upon when you compare elements of Jewish history to the genocide we see in Gaza. And so where do you think that nervousness comes from, and how can we combat it to understand how our liberation is intertwined?
Yeah, we just all need to reject that nervousness as fucking bullshit. I mean, this just serves Zionism. History is meant to be compared. That's how you learn from history. You look at the past and you say, how is this like this? We made a mistake back then. Can we not do that again? You know? So I just reject the pearl clutching. It's a Holocaust. You know, what's happening in Gaza is a Holocaust. Everyone should be able to say that because that's what's happening. Yeah. And so, you know, when you have Israeli sitting ministers in the Knesset and everything calling for the total destruction of people, calling them human animals, it's not complicated. So, yeah, I think the pearl clutching, though, comes from years of cultivation of that fear. Mm-hmm. And this cultivation has been created by billions of dollars of funding for Holocaust institutions, Holocaust memorial institutions, and things like the ADL. Mm-hmm. And I've been this was a really mask-off moment, and I have a chapter in here called "But the Holocaust." It was too long to read today, but I just had this huge mask-off moment this year where, like, I genuinely believed that Holocaust museums existed to make sure that genocide never happened again. Mm-hmm. And that this was very important to preserve this history, so we should never have genocide again. But those museums, I have come to realize, are a weapon. They are an indoctrination tool of Israel. And I'm not saying that the history they are preserving shouldn't be preserved, because it absolutely should. But those institutions take money, they take massive amounts of money from Israel. They do things like deliberately minimizing the other victims of the Holocaust, because 6 million were Jews, but 5 million were communists and Romani people and queer people and disabled people and other ethnic minorities. And these Jewish Holocaust institutions erase that. They make it all about Jewish victimhood. They don't situate the history in the context of a longer tradition of European anti-Jewish hate, which is like a little more complex, and they don't situate it in the context of like this, like all genocides, was largely about wealth and power, and the hate is a tool that the powerful use to do a land and a power grab and a wealth grab. I mean, that's what genocide is. Always about land and wealth and power at the root of it. And the Zionist framing of Holocaust memory is that, no, it's just this special hate for Jews. And they need you to believe in a special hate just because we're Jews. And they need you to believe it's a religious hate because that is what they use to provide this cover of like anything we do is justified. Because if we don't blow up everybody who looks at us funny, then they're going to come for us because we're Jews and everybody hates Jews. And so, yeah, I that's a big realization I had this year, was just like this disgust with the way, and these Holocaust institutions throughout this year have been in lockstep, all of them, silencing, you know, Holocaust survivors who wanted to come and give a speech in support of Palestine. Oh, no, you're disinvited. You know, totally refusing to platform any Jews or otherwise, or Holocaust survivors or anyone who would try to make a comparison between the genocide in Europe in the 1940s and the genocide happening in Gaza today. So yeah, that's so that fear of making those comparisons with the Holocaust or the earlier aspects of Jewish history, there's a lot of money behind that fear. And then over the last, you know, couple decades, the ADL is an attack dog that goes after anybody who makes those comparisons. Even Jews like Jonathan Glazer, the Jewish director who did Zone of Interest, right? And in his Oscar speech, also I think he called for a ceasefire. I don't remember what he said exactly, but he wasn't like, you know, long live the resistance. He was just like, you know, maybe Palestinians are people, I don't know. And the ADL went for him. You know, anybody publicly who has tried to make a comparison between the Holocaust and anything else, particularly anything Israel's doing, they've attacked and smeared and tried to destroy their careers and publicly called them an anti-Semite. Yeah. And I think that the only reaction to that needs to be just rejecting it. And I think Jews have to lead the way in rejecting it, because, you know, we have to just say this is bullshit. Enough of us have to be coming forward, using our platforms to make these comparisons. So, I mean, that's one of the biggest hopes for the book, is that it will really speak to the Jewish community and, you know, yeah.
And speaking of the ADL, it's very selective in who it goes after. And with this general climate of targeting anyone who speaks out Palestine, calling them an anti-Semite, even if they're Jewish, how do we as activists navigate that? How can we maneuver those labels in order to raise awareness? How can you just speak out without being silenced?
Yeah, well, like I said, I think those of us who you need to have an awareness of your own privilege and security and positionality. So I have been called an anti-Semite publicly by Canary Mission. I have a Canary Mission profile, which is this Zionist organization that mostly they dox students, teenagers at college who go to, and mostly they're targeting Palestinian kids and kids of color, and they're trying to destroy these kids' careers before they've even done anything or ever gotten a job, so that they'll never get hired. And they pay a lot of money to have good search engine optimization. So it's still, for me, even though I have a ton of I've published, this is my 5th book, I have done a bunch of press, there's all these positive pieces of media that I put out, and still when you Google my name, Canary Mission is the 3rd thing that comes up.
That's crazy.
Because they really, I mean, they invest in that. You know, and the little banners that, you know, Sim Kern is an anti-Semite who trivializes hatred of Israel, you know. So I think one thing, those of us who have more privilege or stability or can afford to need to be louder, and kind of be in the front. And those of us who are Jewish especially need to be loud and in the front rejecting all this. And those of us who are white need to be loud and in the front rejecting all this. I think irreverence helps. You know, I think just making fun of this shit. I loved hearing people were talking about using Canary Mission profiles as a dating app. Right? And I think that's great. You know, that needs to be the energy of just reject all this bullshit. This is one of the reasons I cuss, is because I think that using respectable language to talk about something as disgusting as genocide kind of gives it a cover. And you should use shocking language to talk about shocking atrocities. And I think it kind of disrupts the this rigid respectability that we feel we have to stay within. We're just we're kicking over the table, you know.